I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
This program is brought to you by the Amazing FBA Mentoring Program. The mentoring program is there for you whether you are just starting out or you have an existing product and you want to add another product, or you want to scale up from a few £1,000s or dollars per month up into the sort of $25,000 a month or so mark, at which point then I would probably hand you over to the 10K Collective Mastermind if you're in the UK. Is it for you if you're outside of the UK? Absolutely. I've got an American client, a British client, weirdly, but who's in Australia. I've got an Australian client in London. I've worked with people in Poland and in Ireland. So it's pretty international. This works for everybody because everyone has similar issues. If you're selling in America, if you're selling in the UK or Europe, or you're planning to sell in UK, Europe or America, I've sold in all those marketplaces and coached people and all that. So all of those people will find that this is a very, very helpful program for them. Why one-to-one mentoring? It's pretty simple, really, because isolation is a dream killer. Trying to learn something just from the raw fire hose of YouTube and podcasts and Facebook groups is going to drive you nuts. But even if you've got the structured work of a course, which I definitely would recommend. I did that myself and I work with people with my course now. I still think it's really, there's no substitute for being able to use somebody as a sounding board, and learning from somebody who's been there before can help you deal with the head trash and have clear, simple processes and hold you accountable to them. So if that sounds attractive to you, guess what? We've got an amazing deal. I very, very rarely reduce the price of my mentoring because I don't want to devalue it in the marketplace, but I'm doing it because I neglected my marketing before Christmas with the PLP, the private level process course I was creating, and I've got a tax bill coming up because I've had a successful year, but that unfortunately means I owe the government a lot of tax. So for those reasons, I need to get a cash influx, so I'm willing to lower my prices for the next 3 or 4 people. After that, it goes back to standard prices, and I will indeed put them up in future as I have done in the past. So if you're interested in exploring that, it's application only. I'm not going to hard sell you into anything. If it's not right for you, we won't work together. But many people have found it very helpful. If you want to find out more about that and see some of the testimonials from the happy people that I've worked with, amazingfba.com/mentoring, mentoring. Thank you so much for listening. Now on with the show. Hello there, welcome to Amazing FBA. This is your host, Michael Veazey. Today I want to talk about productivity, and we're going to have a couple of episodes about this. The first one is talking about what you're trying to produce, because productivity, the ivity bit, sort of sounds very abstract. That's all very well, but unless you define what you're trying to produce clearly, then you won't really be able to measure or judge whether or not you're actually producing, being productive, or just spending time doing stuff because it feels like you should do, or it's virtuous, or whatever it is. So let's get into this. We've got several areas that I want to cover. Financial goals or financial outcomes that you're after, time, people, product, and your business as a whole. So this is geared to business, but needless to say, anything that is effective in the business realm, I think, is effective in life as a whole. I'm not a life coach, so I'm delighted to say I'm a business coach. I'm much more comfortable with that, happy with that. But the fact is, this does apply more broadly than in business. So I'll touch on some of those, but this is for business owners and business developers, and specifically those in e-commerce. So let's go. First one then, financial goals or financial outcomes that you want. One of the things that people obsess about is revenue, but one of the things we should be thinking about is more profit, not just revenue. Now, revenue can be important as a sort of crude metric of things like the size of a business, and the market share that you have in a business is related to your revenue as well. But there is no particular magic about revenue. There is magic about profit. First of all, you can take some of it out to live on, although we'll talk about that in a second, the difference between your business's or your company's profit and your personal income from your business. There is a big difference there. But also, if you want to sell a business, the value of the asset or the value of the business is based on a multiplier of its free cash flow is one term, or its pre-tax profit is another, right? So it's basically the profits. So first thing is to think about that. By all means, have revenue targets, but make sure you have profit targets as well. There's not much point spinning your wheels unless you are trying to gain market share or launch a new product, in which case it could be quite justifiable to not go for profit at that point, but it's about clarity, right? The second thing is the value of the company, not just cash flow now. So the value of the company in, say, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, 2 years' time, if you're planning to sell the business, or even if you're planning to get equity investors or anybody else as well. So This is an interesting one because quite a few members of the 10K Collective, and especially the £1 Million Mastermind, are gearing themselves and building a business to sell. And an e-commerce business done well is a very, very sellable thing because it shouldn't depend too much on the person running it, although there's many questions around that. But when it comes to financial goals, it is very different to spend a lot of money now and maybe forego current profits, and let alone forego current personal income from a business, or take a minimum amount out of it, to not have that now, in order to then grow it faster and bigger, so that in 3 years' time the profits are bigger and therefore the value of the company is bigger if you're planning to sell it in, say, 3 years' time or something, which for a developed business is quite a typical timescale. One of the important things to measure as well is not just profit, but also cash flow. Cash flow and profit and loss are very, very different in a product-based business. For example, the profit or loss of a company is, strictly speaking, a matter for the balance sheet. So this is where I'm getting into accounting technical waters. I'm not an expert in this. Do talk to your accountant if you need clarification. But my understanding is that the change in equity in a business is the profit or loss. So if you have a situation where you have £10,000 in the bank in your business this year, and at the end of the current financial year for your company, whatever that is, you have £20,000 in cash in the bank, then of course you've made a profit of £10,000 in that year. That's very straightforward. Now, with a product-based business, it's very, very different, because you could swap £10,000 cash in the bank for £10,000 worth of products. And if you're in, say, your first year, where you're just about to get trading, it's possible that you would, at the end of that season, have, or that trading period, have changed £10,000 in cash into £10,000 in products, but you haven't actually sold them yet. So the balance sheet would look exactly the same. The equity is £10,000 in cash, is the same value in equity as £10,000 in stock, but the cash position's gone from £10,000 to zero. And if you have a bill come in and you need to pay it, you can't pay it in stock, right? You have to pay it in cash. So that is one of the most profound differences that there are in business, in the e-commerce world, or for that matter, in anywhere that's capital intensive, such as property as well, or stocks and shares for that matter. Inventory is kind of a liquid asset, if you like. You can turn it into cash. In other words, when it works, if it doesn't work, you can't necessarily turn it into cash quickly. So you've got to be very, very aware of the difference between those and the turnover of stock into cash as well. So that's quite a complex area, but I mean, just know that if you're setting goals or productivity, it's not all about profit. You've got to have cash, and they say cash is king. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. And I think that all is absolutely true. Now, a last and very, very, very important point that even quite business-minded people who haven't run their own business before constantly confuse. Here's what it is. Your business's profit is not your personal income to play with. Now, it's pretty simple, but it's amazing how many people come in not, from a day job type scenario where they're service industry. So, I don't know, IT professionals quite often seem to come to me. Lawyers, I haven't had any lawyers actually. Accountants sometimes. So, look, if you get a salary of £80,000 a year, that's yours. Now, obviously, you've got to pay tax on that. You may have to take expenses off for commuting, whatever, but that's basically your income. There's not going to be a huge percentage of that. If your business makes, say, £100,000 a year in revenue, your Amazon business, I'm saying, or your e-commerce business, obviously that is nothing like the profit that it makes. And that sounds like an obvious statement. We've talked about the difference between the two before, but a typical number would be maybe 20%, depending on how well you run your businesses. 30% would be exceptional, 15% maybe more average. But let's say 20%. Okay, then your business makes £20,000 a year in profit. Then you cannot take all of that out of it and expect the business to grow. You will kill the business. So if you took even £10,000 out in personal income, that would probably be risking your business's health, if you like. So that gives you a flavour. In practice, I think most people need to not, or what successful people do, put it this way, that I observe in the masterminds amongst my friends who are the most successful sellers, are simply that you don't take money out of the Amazon business until it's doing a certain amount of revenue and profit. You don't take any money out, preferably. This is a problem. If you've got a day job, you've got to keep working on that probably for longer than you want, which means you're working your day job in the daytime and evenings and weekends you work on Amazon Business. Welcome to life. There is a kind of crunch period. Yes, it's tempting to go full-time with your Amazon Business earlier, but the problem with that is if the business is too small, you're just going to kill it by putting the weight of your needs, your financial needs onto the business. So what seems to happen in practice is that the freedom figure is between about £50,000 and £100,000 a month, and that's more or less where the 10K Collective Mastermind members start from. So some of them are part-time, some of them are full-time with the Amazon Business. So there's nothing wrong with being part-time with that Amazon Business as long as you're feeding it cash from the day job and building a serious business. So those are a few financial realities of what you want your business to produce. And then once you're thinking about that clearly, then you can start to move on to how you use your time and what systems are productive and what things need to be done more, what things you need to eliminate, etc. Second thing about time. Now, time is more about your personal time to start with, as and when you employ a virtual assistant or even a whole team of people, then managing other people's time becomes the problem as well. A lot of us experience as entrepreneurs, I certainly do, a feeling of a lack of time. Tim Ferriss says simply, lack of time is lack of priorities. That sounds like a harsh statement. It feels not true, but actually there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, I think if you feel overwhelmed, that's actually the problem. The overwhelmed feeling is the problem, not even the stuff you've got to do, and it certainly isn't actually a time management problem. So one thing we want to think about before we even get into saving time is what kind of time, because all time is not born equal. As Einstein famously said something like, if you spend an hour with a pretty girl, it feels like a minute. If you put your hand on the stove, or and you're in a hot room, or I can't remember what his second thing was, but a minute feels like an hour. I can't remember, so I've messed that story up. Sorry, Albert. But you get the idea. Time is, he said that jokingly, but he's the guy who invented the theory of relativity, so I guess he knew about these things. So quality time is important. If you are constantly stressed and burdened with your business mentally, and that can easily happen with a solopreneur, a person who runs their own business on their own, or maybe just with a partner, that is going to really affect the quality of your time when you're with friends or loved ones, especially loved ones. So one of the aims with time management, I think, needs to be to create quality time that's free from your business. And the time in the business, to flip that on its head, needs to be quality, productive time as well. So it's not a question of you have various different fights at different stages of business building life. If you're at the early stages, then you're constantly fighting time for your business away from the day job and your family. Okay, fine. That does matter. You certainly need a certain minimum. I would say 20 hours a week is a minimum, really, maybe 15, very, very least. But having said that, the quality of those hours and the focus of those hours is critical. So it's the quality time on your business that helps you grow your business. As and when you become a full-time business owner and worker in your business, or on your business, full-time entrepreneur, then you're in the situation where your family life can sometimes suffer as well. So then it's a question of, okay, making you quality time, not quantity necessarily, with your family, so that when you're with your wife or husband or mother, son, whatever your nearest and dearest are, that you're not constantly checking your phone for emergency messages from your business, that you've got systems in place and priorities so that you can have a relaxed dinner with your wife or play with your children or whatever it may be. One of the other things about time, let's talk about the time in the business, is to look for more productive time. Perry Marshall talks about £10 an hour or $10 an hour, $100 an hour and $1,000 an hour work. I would argue that it's very hard to get to $1,000 an hour work, but it can happen. That's the kind of thing where you really re-engineer your entire business system. And that, to that degree, listening to a podcast whilst running or driving to work, or in my case, I wash up and do it. And I love running and listen to audiobooks or podcasts as well. And that's very productive, because if it helps you re-engineer your whole business, then if you actually implement the theories that you learn there, that can be very, very good as well. I would say that a good mastermind, and I know from experience the 10K Collective, this is true for them as well, and the £1 Million Mastermind, that if you get an insight in a mastermind that leads you to open up in a new country or something and add £600,000 to your bottom line, your top line, your revenue, then that's going to be measured at thousands of pounds an hour in terms of value. So that's a clear indication of, if you like, £10,000 an hour work. I think you need to differentiate between strategic use of time, like mastermind or having a consultation with a business coach like I did yesterday, or planning meetings with your team, versus the tactics and implementation side. It comes down to this old balance, that proverb I keep going back to again and again, which is, quoted by Tony Robbins, that action without vision is a nightmare. Vision without action is a daydream. In other words, if you spend too much time planning and you don't do it, it's just a fantasy. And that's where a lot of newbies or would-be entrepreneurs get stuck. And I hear you, and I sympathize. By the way, I'm not judging. I do the same. Even now I fall into that trap. So a lot of us struggle with implementation. But once you get into implementation, if you're really an action taker, and especially the people in the mastermind show up in this way, then there is a lot of scope for thinking more strategically and taking planning time out. Because if you're busy working in your business and it's doing, say, £1 million a year, fantastic. But if you want to grow it to the point where it's doing 4 or 5 million and then sell it, and say at 20% profit, which means you can sell it for, say, about £3 million and retire, then if that's your goal, for example, you cannot just continue working in your business all the time and expect to hit that goal, because you won't be able to do it. You hit the limitation of the amount of hours you have and the potential productivity you can have. So in other words, when you get to a certain level, thinking strategically, in other words, thinking about the business as a whole, and especially about bringing on new people or automating things with computer systems, or bringing on new people, becomes really, really critical. Something else about time management then, if you find that you are struggling to get out of the office away from your day job, if you're in the early stages, in order to work on your Amazon business, or if you find you're working in your Amazon business way too many hours and your family life or your health is getting neglected, which is very, very common for entrepreneurs, of course, then there's a great book called The Agile Planning Book. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's very good. I read it recently. I will put it in the show notes. I think it's Josh says, flex scope, not time. So in other words, you need to be strict in the time that you allocate to a project or an area. For example, product research, for example, sourcing, for example, finding a new team member, whatever it may be. So instead of adding more hours in and throwing hours at the problem until you've solved it, yes, you can sometimes end up having to do that in the early days, but there's a real stamina issue with that after a few months. So you can't do that sustainably. Instead, what he says is flex the scope. So in other words, if you're going to try and hire 3 new assistants and you've given yourself, say, 20 hours a week for over 3 weeks, and you find that can't be done in that time, instead of adding more hours to it and destroying your health and relationships over time, you instead cut it down and say, well, I'm going to hire one person, but I'm going to make them really good and effective. And over time, that means you sustain your health, you sustain your energy, you sustain your relationships, and that means that over time, you will achieve what you want. It may just take you longer, and that's okay. It's about sustainability, really. So in other words, you try and set your work goals to fit into the time you designate as available, rather than throwing hours at the problem, which isn't very sustainable after a certain amount. I'm not suggesting that you don't have to work hard. I think you do. I'm not suggesting you won't have to burn the midnight oil, especially when you have a day job and are building a business. At some point, you will be working very strong, long hours. But you need to be disciplined about the fact that you're not just going to be capable of working ridiculous hours, right? Working at a day job 9 to 7, say, coming home, kiss your wife, have dinner, work 9 till midnight on your Amazon business. That's pretty tough, but it's sustainable. For some people, there is. For one member of the 10K Collective, who I take my hat off to. I just can't believe that he does it and has done it for several years. But if he tried to work from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. every day, then that would probably blow up pretty quickly, because he can't survive with that amount of sleep. In terms of time management, again, or goal management, if in doubt, have just one goal per day. I just think, for me personally, the mental overwhelm kicks in so quickly if I try, for example, to fix the new subscription system for the £1 Million Mastermind, which I've got to do. I need to get in touch with a bunch of podcast guests, and I need to create these podcasts today. Now, if I try and make all 3 equally important in my mind, I just end up flipping between them anxiously, thinking, oh God, that isn't done, oh God, I must do that, and that's not productive. So I'm just doing this podcast right now because I think that is actually the most important goal of today. And one of the simple tests for whether a task is the right thing to focus on is, if I get to the end of the day and I've only accomplished this task, will I be at least satisfied with my day? I may not be delighted, but satisfied. And I'm I'm a ridiculous person when it comes to time management. I'm always way too ambitious about how much I can achieve, or I and my team or other outside contractors can achieve in a certain time frame. And if that's how you roll, like a lot of entrepreneurs do, then you just have to recognize that your first pass, your first draft of your time management and goal setting is probably ludicrous, and you need to do it again and then do it again. And your third version, if you cut it right down, might just be doable. So we talked about finances and time. What about people? We've touched on team members. We've talked about your personal relationships as well. So I would say that there's so much to be said about this, but the first thing is the way you think about the problem, as they say, is the problem. I think Stephen Covey said that in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which, by the way, is an amazing book. We've done a couple of podcasts about that, and we'll do more because it is an incredible book. So here's the first thing. Build a team, rather than just micromanaging people who can solve immediate problems. And I'm very guilty of hiring people to solve immediate problems. And actually, because I'm thinking so short term, like I want to get it done now within the next 24, 48 hours, maybe a week, that I don't end up developing the expertise and the relationships with people. I do have a sort of smattering of very capable people that I work with, but it's a bit sporadic. So if and to the extent that I've built people who understand me and my business now, things get just done more smoothly, more quickly. So resist the urge to go on Fiverr to get somebody to solve a one-off problem. Try and develop a team of people who can solve ongoing problems. For example, I've got a podcast editor because I keep producing podcasts, so it's no good just looking for one person to do a one-off job of editing it. Build business partnerships. Don't just fill a hole in the supply chain. So that's a really important one. I mean, your suppliers in China are really one of the most important things in your entire business if you're in e-commerce. Now, they are interchangeable to a degree in that there are, in any given Chinese city, probably hundreds of factories that do a similar thing to what your suppliers do. But if you build a great relationship with them, the relationship in itself adds to the value of what you have there. The third thing is a more subtle way of thinking, especially on e-commerce and on Amazon above all, is quite tricky to do. But think in terms of building a client base, not just a load of one-hit customers. Now, obviously, on Amazon, that's very hard to engineer, but not impossible. And if you're building an e-commerce business as a whole, that is certainly the direction you should be thinking and working towards. And it can't necessarily be done at the tactical, immediate level, but on the longer-term level, you're going to be thinking in terms of things like creating relationships with people who have your audience, like influencers, creating your own influencer mechanisms like an Instagram feed that's really fantastic, or a Facebook group of brand ambassadors, to name but two of the strategies that people are employing in the 10K Collective Mastermind. So this is a big picture way of thinking, but again, this obsession with customers that are one-offs as opposed to thinking in terms of engineering a business that produces ongoing customer relationships is something else you want to think about, and try and choose your goals with great thoughtfulness. Okay, so the next couple of areas that we're going to cover, so far, just to recap, we've covered financials, time management, and people, really critical. A couple of Amazon-specific things now. The fourth area is markets. Don't think of product research, look for markets you can dominate. Something I've said a lot, so I'm not going to say too much more about it, but don't try and sell products. You need to look for markets defined by a person and a pain, and then to a degree also defined by the keywords they put in. That's not the same as a physical product. Okay, because the physical product could have a lot of different designs or different ways of solving the same problem. The second thing is, don't aim to find a market where you can make X amount of unit sales per day. That's a silly thing to aim for. I mean, if you're selling 10 units a day, as is a common. The other thing is, don't try and just take a certain amount of revenue. Aim to dominate a market. And it's absolutely critical. The STAR principle tells us that we need to dominate a small market. What does dominate mean? It means you'll buy a substantial margin, the largest seller in that market, measured by revenue, not any other abstract way of doing it. Don't create products. I can't remember who said this, but don't create products, then try to attract customers to buy the products. Create products in order to serve your customers and get repeat customers. The real value is in the customers, not really in the products. Another thing you want to aim for is to create defensibility in the product. So don't aim to get me too products just because it looks attractive or simple, because there won't be much profit, if any, these days at all. And really, really take the trouble to understand your consumer and what they need and can't get elsewhere. Be unique, be different in your market. That's absolutely critical. We've talked about it elsewhere, so I'm not going to say too much more about that, but it's so critical. With the product itself, differentiate the product. Don't ever just do me too products. Don't just make sure that you are starting with the consumer and what they want and need, because that's what you've got to end with when you do your marketing. If you get your market research right, in the sense of really understanding your consumer, the process, the flip side of that, once you've sourced it, of launching it to that consumer shouldn't be a big deal if you've done your homework. The final thing is to look at business outcomes. People get very obsessed with a lot of things. We've talked about the difference between revenue and profit. But if you want to build a sellable business, then go for that. Don't just go for short-term cash flow. The ability to delay gratification is in everything from psychological studies of 1, 2, and 3-year-olds all the way through to business builders, incredibly correlated to success. In other words, if you can forego making a few £1,000s now in order to build a business that you can sell for £1 million in 5 years' time, then you are going to win much, much bigger than those of the smaller mentality. Easily said, it's easy to say, hard to do, but nevertheless absolutely true. So try and discipline yourself to live in a way such that you delay gratification. You don't have to deny gratification. You know, if you want money and good things in life, then go for them. But the way to get them, ironically, is to delay that gratification. So instead of eating the seedlings or the saplings now, grow a tree and then eat the fruit, and the tree still exists, right? You want to build sustainable value, not just cash flow. We talked about that. Build a real brand, i.e. positioning consumers' minds. Now, that's a very long-term, big picture thing. That does not mean just create a logo and a bit of packaging and you're done. That's not real, okay? What is real is creating positioning. That's a longer-term play, but you can start today by aiming towards that and make your actions consistent with that. Build a business you enjoy running. This is critical. If you are obsessed with money to the exclusion of your experience of creating the business, whilst there will be things that challenge you, if you basically don't enjoy your business, you're going to have a miserable time building it to the point of selling. It's normally a much longer path than you think or want. But also, what's the point of going from a day job to your own business where you get to choose your own adventure and choosing instead of to be miserable? So be real about that and make it a conscious part of doing business. Again, one of the wonderful things about the 10K Collective and £1 Million Mastermind is the fun we have there. It is a lot of fun. It's challenging intellectually. It's fun. The intellectual challenge, the interactivity of it, the fact that you get a scorecard in your numbers, and revenue, profit, cash flow, etc. That's what makes it cool and fun. If you don't enjoy it, change something or get out of the business model, do something different. Can't say how important that is. The other thing is you won't be successful if you don't enjoy your business, because you won't really commit. It will come through at some level to the consumers. You'll end up with a Me Too business, really. And finally, very important, enjoy the process of building the business. Even learning from the scratch, if that's where you're at. Enjoy that process. If you're all about making the money as soon as possible, you're going to be anxious and driven by you're just not going to enjoy it because you're driven by the wrong things. Money is important. Of course, that's the reason we run businesses, but that's kind of also, if you like, a side effect of creating a wonderful business and serving people wonderfully is money. You've got to have it. I'm not being abstract about that, but by the same token, don't obsess about that to the exclusion of enjoyment of the process, because otherwise you're crazy. It's going to take too long and too much work to do anything but enjoy it. So just to wrap up, productivity is meaningless unless you define what you're trying to produce. So after you define this, you can measure people, products, and processes against those outcomes. So that is where the power of elimination can come in, which is something that is not often enough talked about, and we will be talking about that in an episode near you soon. Thanks very much for listening. As ever, the show notes will be at the blog amazingfba.com/blog, blog. They are pretty detailed most of the time. These will be sort of outline notes, but still hopefully a bit of a checklist to make you think. These aren't actionable little tactical things, but they could be, if you like, a change to the operating principles on which you operate in your business, I hope. Thanks very much for listening. Speak to you soon.